A corrupt cop kicks a pregnant woman in broad daylight. He thinks he owns the streets. But when her brother, Mike Tyson, arrives, everything changes. The crowd watches in stunned silence as the legendary fighter turns the tables, delivering a brutal lesson in justice. What happens next will leave you speechless. Watch as power meets its match, and justice is served in the most unforgettable way. Stay until the end. Trust me, you won't believe how this ends. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The air in Chicago's West End was thick with the scent of fresh pastries and brewing coffee. The sun, though dipping low in the sky, cast an amber glow across the bustling street. Among the crowd, Lena Tyson, Mike Tyson's pregnant sister, strolled toward the bakery with a contented smile. She was 7 months along, and though her body ached from carrying new life, the joy of impending motherhood made every step worth it. A brown paper bag filled with warm croissants nestled against her belly as she reached a wooden bus bench nearby. She sighed in relief, resting one hand protectively over her swollen stomach while pulling out her phone with the other. She was just about to text her brother, letting him know she was waiting, when screech! The sudden, violent screech of tires cut through the peaceful street like a blade. A police cruiser, its sirens off but its menace unmistakable, swerved to an aggressive stop right in front of her. Conversations hushed, heads turned, and the air shifted. People knew the drill. When the police showed up like that, trouble followed. The driver's door slammed open, and out stepped Officer Darren Cross, a broad, heavy-set man with an authoritative gait, his icy blue eyes locked onto Lena with immediate disdain. His uniform, stretched across his chest like a symbol of unchecked power, only accentuated his bulldog-like arrogance. He walked toward her, with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who relished making others afraid. Lena's brows furrowed in confusion. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet the predatory look in Officer Cross's eyes sent a ripple of unease through her. "Hey, you!" Cross barked, his voice cutting through the street like a whip. Lena blinked, unsure he was even talking to her. "Me?" Cross scoffed. "Yeah, you. What do you think you're doing here?" She gestured at the bakery bag and her phone. "I'm just sitting here, waiting for my—" Wrong answer. His voice dripped with disgust as he stepped closer, towering over her. "This ain't a place for loitering, and especially not for you people." Lena's stomach twisted with anger. You people. She had heard that phrase before, the same phrase her mother had warned her about. It was never just about sitting somewhere. It was about being seen. Her voice remained steady, but her pulse quickened. "Officer, I just bought food from the bakery. I'm not loitering." Cross's eyes darkened. "You don't get to decide that, sweetheart." A slow, cruel grin stretched across his face as he placed a hand on his baton, a silent warning. Lena's grip tightened around her belly. "I'm pregnant," she reminded him, as if pleading for a sliver of humanity. Cross's lip curled. "Oh? And that's supposed to mean something to me?" Before Lena could react, it happened. With no hesitation, Cross kicked her. His thick leather boot slammed into her ribs, sending blinding pain tearing through her body. A strangled scream ripped from her throat as her body lurched sideways off the bench, crashing onto the cold pavement. The paper bag fell beside her, pastries spilling out onto the ground, a cruel mockery of the innocence shattered in that moment. A horrified gasp swept through the watching crowd. Shock turned to horror. Lena clutched her stomach, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. What if something happened to the baby? Tears of pain welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had to protect her child. Cross laughed. Actually laughed. "That'll teach you some respect," he sneered, towering over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. Gasps turned to murmurs of outrage. People grabbed their phones, recording the sickening display of power abuse. A young woman crouched beside Lena, whispering words of comfort while dialing 911 with trembling fingers. But before anyone else could act, the crowd suddenly shifted. Like a storm rolling in, an SUV screeched to a halt nearby, the doors flinging open with terrifying urgency. Mike Tyson stepped out. A hush fell over the street. The moment he saw her on the ground, his eyes changed. It wasn't just anger that burned in those dark pupils. It was something primal, something unstoppable. Cross, still gloating, didn't notice at first. "What? Somebody else wanna—" His words died in his throat as he turned, coming face to face with pure, living fury. Mike Tyson moved like a panther, crossing the distance in 3 steps. Cross barely had time to react, before a hand, massive, solid, unrelenting, snatched him by the collar. The crowd erupted into chaos. Cross stammered, his bravado crumbling. Sir, I—" Tyson's voice was low and lethal. "You just kicked my pregnant sister?" The cop tried to wriggle free, but it was like trying to move a mountain. The tension boiled over, rage filling the air like gasoline meeting fire. And then, boom. The first punch landed so hard, Cross's body lifted off the ground. Justice had arrived. Lena Tyson lay curled on the cold pavement, her arms wrapped around her pregnant belly, her mind a whirlwind of panic. The pain was unbearable, every breath sending sharp stabs of agony through her ribs where Officer Darren Cross's boot had landed. Her trembling fingers pressed against her stomach, desperate to feel some sign of movement from her unborn child. Then, there it was, a tiny kick. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. Above her, Officer Cross loomed, his cold blue eyes glinting with satisfaction, his boot still hovering over her, as if he might strike again. He grinned, mocking her pain, his voice dripping with condescension. "See what happens when you people don't listen," he sneered. The bystanders, once mere onlookers, were now furious. Phones were raised, cameras rolling, capturing every second of his abuse. Murmurs turned to shouts. "This is sick. Did he just kick a pregnant woman? Somebody stop him!" A young woman, her hands shaking with rage, rushed forward, kneeling beside Lena. "Are you okay? Should we call an ambulance?" Before Lena could answer, Cross's baton scraped against his belt, his grip tightening around it. His sick grin widened, relishing the power he wielded over people who could do nothing to stop him. "You touch that phone, I'll throw you in jail for obstruction," he barked at the woman. Lena's breath shuddered with fury. Despite her pain, she managed to lift her head, meeting his gaze. "You're a monster," she spat, her voice shaking but defiant. Cross laughed. "A monster?" he echoed, his lips curling into a mocking smirk. "No, sweetheart, I'm the law. And you? You're just another problem that needs to learn her place." His grip tightened on his baton. He was going to hit her again. The crowd surged forward, anger bubbling over. "You're on camera, man. You're done. She's pregnant. Are you insane? You can't just do this." But Cross wasn't worried. He was the law, and in his world, the law didn't answer to anyone. Then, a low, terrifying growl cut through the noise. It was deeper than any voice in the crowd, a sound so raw, so full of fury, that it sent an instant chill down Cross's spine. The crowd hushed. A shadow loomed over them. Cross turned and froze. Mike Tyson. His broad frame was rigid with barely contained rage, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like granite ready to crack. His fists, Legendary weapons that had brought champions to their knees flexed at his sides. But it was his eyes that made Cross's breath hitch. They were locked onto him with terrifying intensity, a storm of fury brewing within them. For the first time, Cross felt something he had never felt before. Fear. The cop staggered back, his mouth opening, but no words came out. Tyson's voice, low and seething, sent a shiver down everyone's spine. "You just kicked my pregnant sister?" Cross's throat went dry. The crowd held their breath. The tension was thick as iron chains. One wrong move, and the storm would break. Cross tried to reassert control, forcing a fake smirk onto his face. "Sir, you need to step back. This doesn't concern—" Boom! Before the sentence could leave his mouth, Tyson struck. His fist rocketed forward, a blur of unstoppable force, and crack! It collided with Cross's ribs with the force of a sledgehammer. The crowd erupted. Cross was airborne. His feet left the ground, his entire body lifted off the pavement as if he had been hit by a truck. His body slammed against his own squad car, the metal denting beneath his weight. A wheeze escaped his lips, his lungs struggling to drag in air. His once cocky expression was gone, replaced by pain and pure terror. Tyson didn't move. He stood over him, his fists coiled and ready, his muscles tight, radiating the danger of a lion protecting its pride. Cross clutched his ribs, coughing, wheezing. The crowd was electrified. "Did you see that? Holy sh! He folded like paper." Cross struggled to push himself up, but his legs wobbled beneath him. His hand jerked toward his belt, reaching for his taser. But Tyson caught the motion instantly. In a flash, he grabbed Cross by the wrist, twisting it with brutal precision. Snap! A howl of agony ripped from Cross's throat as his wrist bent in a direction it was never meant to go. His taser clattered to the ground. The crowd roared. The disgraced cop now lay sprawled at Tyson's feet, helpless, broken, humiliated. Mike Tyson exhaled, slow and heavy, towering over the beaten man. His voice, thick with warning, carried across the silent street. "You ever put your hands on my family again, and you won't get back up." Cross, panting and shaking, could do nothing but nod. And as the siren of another squad car wailed in the distance, the crowd knew. The crowd stood frozen, their breath hitched in their throats, eyes locked on the storm of fury that was Mike Tyson. The once boastful officer Darren Cross was now writhing on the pavement, clutching his ribs, his face contorted in unimaginable agony. The air crackled with energy, the kind that only comes when justice is being served in real time. Cross tried to push himself up, but his body betrayed him, his limbs trembling under the weight of his own humiliation. His eyes, once filled with mocking arrogance, now flickered with fear, darting around as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. Tyson took a step forward, slow, deliberate, the footsteps of fate itself approaching. The crowd whispered among themselves, a mix of shock, excitement, and pure satisfaction. He deserved that. I hope Mike gives him more. That monster kicked a pregnant woman. No mercy. The fallen cop sputtered, his chest heaving, trying to form words, but all that came out was a ragged wheeze. He reached for his belt, hoping to grab his radio. But Tyson saw it coming. In an instant, Mike's massive hand clamped down on Cross's wrist, squeezing it like a vice grip of unrelenting power. Crack! A horrified scream tore through the street as Cross's wrist snapped like a dry twig, his body convulsing in agony. The crowd gasped. Some cheered. Others flinched, knowing that what had just happened was far beyond any punishment the law would have ever given him. Tyson's voice was low, a growl of pure, unfiltered rage. "You don't touch my family." Cross, His once authoritative voice reduced to a desperate whimper, choked out, Please, Bam! Before he could finish his sentence, Tyson drove a brutal knee into his gut, sending him sprawling onto his side, coughing, gasping for air like a fish flopping on the deck of a boat. The crowd erupted. Phones zoomed in, capturing the raw, unfiltered destruction of a man who had spent his life abusing his badge, now reduced to a quivering, broken shell at the feet of a true warrior. Lena Tyson, still clutching her belly, was helped to her feet by a woman in the crowd. Her eyes locked onto her brother, her face a mixture of gratitude and deep, unrelenting pain. But before anything else could happen, the piercing wail of sirens filled the air. A second squad car screeched to a halt, tires burning hot against the asphalt. 2 officers jumped out, their hands hovering over their holsters. But then, they saw who was standing over Cross. Their posture changed instantly. One of them, a senior officer, locked eyes with Mike Tyson. He wasn't stupid. He had seen the footage, seen the phone's recording, seen the bruised and battered cop on the ground. He took a slow, calculated breath, then turned his gaze toward Cross, who was barely conscious, his body twisted in agony. The truth was obvious. The senior officer stepped forward, his expression grim. He looked down at his fallen colleague, then back at the growing crowd, now filled with righteous fury. Finally, his gaze settled on Lena, her hands still shaking, her swollen belly a painful reminder of the brutality she had just endured. His jaw tightened. Then, in a move that shocked the entire street, the officer reached for his handcuffs and slapped them onto Cross's wrists. Gasps filled the air. "You're under arrest, Officer Cross," the senior cop announced, his tone firm, unwavering, "for assault, abuse of power, and excessive force." Cross groaned, his eyes wide with disbelief. Wait, what? I was just... Shut up." The senior officer's voice was cold, merciless. "You think the department's going to protect you after what you did?" He spat. "We saw the footage. You're done." The crowd burst into cheers. Mike Tyson, breathing heavily, his knuckles still aching from the fight, finally let himself exhale. Lena, still shaking, reached for his arm. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice wavered. Tyson placed a protective hand over her shoulder, his entire body still tense, still burning with the need to destroy the man who had hurt his sister. But the battle was over. Cross was hauled to his feet, his body wobbling, his expression pure humiliation. As he was shoved into the back of the squad car, his gaze flickered to Tyson one last time. And in that moment, he knew. This was the end for him. The crowd continued filming, knowing this moment would spread like wildfire. Justice wasn't always served, but today it had been delivered personally by Mike Tyson's fists. The deafening wail of sirens cut through the air, echoing between the towering city buildings. The smell of burnt rubber from the patrol car's abrupt stop mixed with the tension, thick and suffocating. The doors flew open, and 2 officers rushed out, their hands instinctively hovering over their holsters. But then, they saw him. Mike Tyson, standing over the broken form of Officer Darren Cross, his fists clenched, his chest rising and falling like a raging storm, barely held at bay. The legendary boxer was not just a man in that moment. He was a force of nature. Cross, still wheezing, coughed out a pathetic, "Help me." Logically, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. The senior officer, Lieutenant Parker, froze. His instincts screamed at him to step in, to restore order, but the sight before him made his blood run cold. Tyson's glare locked onto the approaching officers, unflinching, daring them to make a move. For a moment, no one breathed. The crowd, still electrified from witnessing Cross's long overdue downfall, stood motionless, awaiting the next move. Then, the officers made the smartest decision they could. Parker's eyes flicked from Tyson to Cross, then to Lena, her hand gripping her swollen belly, still shaking from the sheer horror she had just endured. Her skin was pale, her lip trembling, but she stood strong. And that's when everything changed. Parker saw the recording phones, the dozens of eyes glued to the scene, the undeniable truth written in bruises on Cross's own body.